Viviamo una fase storica accelerata.
Picture this. It is September 2025, and a small Italian Navy vessel cuts through the choppy waters of the Adriatic Sea. On board 16 men from Bangladesh and Egypt, rescued from the Mediterranean, believe they are heading to Italy. Instead, they find themselves at a gleaming new facility in Albania, Europe's first offshore asylum processing center. Within days, they are back in Italy, their brief detention sparking a continental crisis that reaches the highest courts in Europe. This is the story of how one woman's audacious gamble is rewriting the rules of European migration policy. Whether Brussels likes it or not, Europe today faces a choice that will define its future. On one side stands Giorgia Meloni, Italy's iron-willed Prime Minister, who looked at the endless stream of boats crossing the Mediterranean and said enough. While Germany debates whether to ban political parties and Brussels drafts yet another migration pact, Meloni built detention centers on foreign soil and militarized her coastline. The establishment called her reckless, human rights groups called her cruel, and European courts called her illegal. But the numbers do not lie, and they are about to change everything you thought you knew about Europe's migration crisis. The statistics paint a picture that even Meloni's harshest critics cannot ignore. Mediterranean crossings, the most dangerous migration route in the world, plummeted by nearly 60% in 2024. Italy, once the reluctant gateway to Europe for hundreds of thousands, saw arrivals drop from over 157,000 in 2023 to just 66,000 the following year. Across the entire European Union, irregular border crossings fell to their lowest levels since 2021, when COVID-19 had effectively sealed the continent's borders. These are not just numbers on a bureaucrat's desk in Brussels. They represent thousands of lives not risked on rickety boats, thousands of tragedies that never happened. Yet somehow this success story has become Europe's most controversial political experiment. To understand why Meloni's approach has sent shockwaves through European capitals, you need to grasp what she actually did. The Albania model is not just tough border enforcement. It is a complete reimagining of how Europe handles asylum seekers. Under a 5-year agreement worth hundreds of millions of euros, Italy constructed 2 state-of-the-art facilities on Albanian soil, creating what legal scholars call extraterritorial Italian jurisdiction. Migrants rescued by Italian ships in international waters would no longer automatically set foot on European soil. Instead, they would be processed in Albania under accelerated procedures, with claims decided within 28 days rather than the months or years typical in Italy. Those granted asylum would be transferred to Italy, and those denied would be immediately deported from Albania. It was efficient, streamlined, and according to the European Court of Justice, potentially illegal. The legal battle that followed revealed deep fractures within the European project. Italian courts, citing European law, repeatedly blocked the transfers, questioning whether Egypt and Bangladesh could truly be considered safe countries of origin, when significant portions of their territories posed risks to returnees. The European Court of Justice, in a landmark ruling, declared that no country could be deemed entirely safe unless its entire territory offered protection to everyone, a standard so strict it could disqualify half the world. Meloni's response was characteristically defiant. If European law prevents effective border control, then European law must change. She accused judges of sabotaging democratic governance and weaponizing procedure against policy. The confrontation laid bare a fundamental question in Europe's system of shared sovereignty: who ultimately decides immigration policy? While Italy battled, courts and critics other European nations watched with fascination. Dutch government representatives quietly visited the Albanian facilities, exploring whether they could replicate the model British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, whose country had abandoned its own Rwanda deportation scheme, praised Meloni's innovative thinking, and sought deeper cooperation. Across Scandinavia, traditionally, liberal governments began tightening asylum rules and expanding deportation powers. Even Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, once skeptical of offshore processing, started speaking approvingly of out-of-the-box solutions and return hubs in third countries. The woman dismissed as a far-right populist was becoming the trendsetter for mainstream European policy. But the human cost of this revolution is written in both triumph and tragedy. The International Organization for Migration reported that 2,300 people still died attempting Mediterranean crossings in 2024. Despite the reduced numbers, critics argue that Meloni's policies simply pushed desperate migrants toward more dangerous routes, citing increased arrivals in Spain's Canary Islands and rising fatalities on alternative pathways, the Albanian. Detention centres with their high walls and prison-like conditions drew comparisons to Australia's offshore facilities, where suicide rates and mental health crises plagued detainees for years. Human rights organisations documented cases of family separation, improper screening of vulnerable individuals, and legal aid obstructed by the remote location. For every statistic showing fewer arrivals, there was another showing increased suffering among those who still attempted the journey. Yet for every human rights advocate condemning the policy, there was an Italian mayor whose community was no longer overwhelmed by arrivals, a Coast Guard officer who made fewer desperate rescue calls, a taxpayer who saw order restored to chaos on Lampedusa. The tiny island that became synonymous with Europe's migration crisis, residents speak of a new normal villages that once saw thousands of migrants arrive overnight, now function as communities again. Local businesses previously disrupted by constant emergency responses have returned to serving tourists and residents. The psychological impact of regaining control is immense. Meloni's approval ratings remain high because many Italians feel their government finally listened to their concerns rather than Brussels' directives. The financial dimension of Meloni's experiment tells its own story. The Albanian facilities costing nearly €1 billion over 5 years process a fraction of the migrants they were designed to handle. Critics calculate that each person sent to Albania costs Italian taxpayers more than €30,000, enough to house, feed, and integrate multiple asylum seekers in Italy. Opposition politicians mock the centres as the world's most expensive empty shelters standing idle while salaries and maintenance costs accumulate. Meloni's defenders counter that the deterrent effect justifies any expense. If the mere existence of the Albanian option discourages thousands from attempting the crossing, the programme pays for itself in lives saved and services not strained. This is not accounting, they argue. It is strategic national security investment. As Italy tightened its borders, migration flows shifted eastward, overwhelming Greece and Cyprus, the Western Balkans. The route, once nearly closed, saw new smuggling networks adapt. Border communities in Slovenia, Croatia, and Austria reported increased pressure as migrants sought alternative pathways. Brussels soon found itself managing not just a migration crisis, but a crisis of solidarity among member states. Meloni's model exposed the fundamental contradiction in European migration policy. The EU demands humanitarian standards while expecting frontline states to bear the burden. It demands unity while allowing northern countries to avoid responsibility due to geography. It speaks of common values while tolerating vast disparities in enforcement. Meloni recognized this system was unsustainable and acted by creating facts on the ground in Albania. She forced Europe to confront these contradictions. The geopolitical implications extend far beyond migration. Meloni's success emboldened Eurosceptic movements across Europe. If Italy can ignore ECJ rulings and pursue independent policies successfully, why should other countries defer to Brussels on taxation regulation or border control? The precedent of extraterritorial jurisdiction opens possibilities. Legal scholars are only beginning to study. Could France build centres in Morocco? Could Spain operate hubs in West Africa? The Albania model may be the first crack in a dam. As winter storms hit the Mediterranean in early 2025, those Albanian centres stood mostly empty, their purpose suspended by legal challenges. But their psychological impact remained. Smugglers lost certainty. Migrants adjusted calculations. The old assumptions crumbled. The future of Meloni's migration revolution now hinges on legal rulings in Luxembourg and political decisions in Brussels. The new EU Pact on Migration taking effect in 2026, may adopt elements of her system. Elections in France, Germany, and the Netherlands will determine whether her model spreads or stays uniquely Italian. But regardless of what comes next, she has already changed the debate. Europe is no longer asking whether it should control its borders, but how quickly and effectively it can. Standing at the Albanian port of Shëngjin today, watching Italian naval vessels patrol waters where rescue ships once operated freely, you witness a revolution in European thinking. The walls and surveillance towers reflect more than security. They reflect a continent struggling with its identity. Are these centers the future of European border management or monuments to the failure of European ideals? Giorgia Meloni has given her answer carved in concrete and steel on foreign soil. Now Europe must decide whether to follow her lead or forge a different path.